Let's say good morning to GOP strategist Victoria Churchill. Victoria, good morning. Thanks for the time. Let's get a quick update and your thoughts on the South Carolina primary. As expected, Donald Trump won big in Nikki Haley's home state, about 60-40, about a 20-point victory there. Nikki Haley vows to stay in the race, but she's had a major donor pull some funding. The Koch brothers have said, yeah, we're out of cash for you, Nikki. There's no path. So good morning, Victoria. Your thoughts on South Carolina?
Good morning, Mike. So happy to be on with you. You know, I think, as you pointed out, the results that we saw this weekend out of South Carolina are as expected, but I think they were pretty disappointing for the Haley camp, obviously, as that was her home state. So it's interesting to see where she goes from there. She's obviously committed to stay in the race through Super Tuesday at minimum. She's doing events in early primary Super Tuesday states that are coming up. She was in Minnesota, or she was in Michigan, Minnesota. She'll be in Virginia, which is my home state. She's got 2 events scheduled here later this week. So she is at least publicly putting up a face that she is still in the race. She still has events scheduled, and she's still going out and interacting with voters. And, I'm interested to see how that goes for her in these states. But I think for her, this will probably be kind of the final test of any sort of viability that remains for her campaign.
Donald Trump has swept every primary thus far, 4 states, 4 wins for him, as he is gobbling up all the delegates. And it just, she just doesn't have a path. She's hanging on. She's probably hoping for, Donald Trump to find himself in legal hot water, and here she is kind of just hanging out in the wings and hoping for the best there. But that really isn't the best strategy, especially considering that she's losing money. I mean, that's the only reason she's been able to stay in the race is finances, paying staff, buying advertisement, and that's just starting to dry up, and it's going to be curtains for her, I would think, very quickly.
Absolutely. Now, I do want to point out that numbers have come out that she's actually raised about $1 million since the loss, which I think is fairly interesting. There are folks that are, for some reason, stepping up and investing in her campaign and wanting for her to stay in the race. But obviously, that number is nowhere near the amount that organizations like Koch-aligned AFP had committed to support her race. So it'll be interesting to see if that money dries up or if it keeps coming from other sources now that she's lost a major funder. I guess you could argue that both are interesting, right? Because on one hand, this is one of the criticisms that I think the Trump camp has had of the Haley campaign, is that Trump has relied more significantly on grassroots donors, I think, really than any Republican that we've ever seen running at this level, versus with the Haley camp, a lot of the attacks have been that it's the mega donors that are supporting her campaign. So now that the mega donors out, can she make that shift financially, and will that actually be a shift in the kinds of voters that she's able to attract in what will probably be the last few weeks of her campaign?
Speaking with Victoria Churchill, GOP strategist on the LegacyRetirementGroup.com phone line. So let's talk about the primary a little bit in South Carolina. This was an open primary, meaning anybody, regardless of political affiliation, can vote in it. And there's pros and cons. There is a little bit of a push for all open primaries across the country. Before we kind of drill down on the pros and cons of it, Victoria, do you think that it should be the same nationwide, or should states get to choose whether they have an open or closed primary? Because it is kind of confusing. You've got one primary one day that's open, and then the next couple are closed. And it seems like it's just kind of hard to track and hard to strategize if you're running for office.
Personally, I would encourage states to adopt more of an open primary model, because I do believe that larger increases in voter participation are better for our democracy. And that is kind of a trend that we've seen in states that do have open primaries, is that primary voter participation rates are higher. Now, they are still abysmally low, and I think lower than most people would want to see them. They average about 20 to 30%, depending on whether it's a presidential year versus a midterm year. Kind of across the country. You guys in Ohio are actually right about the national average. And so, I think really anything that you can do to get more voters in the door is better. And actually, in terms of getting data for campaigns, campaigning now has really become a data game, right? And so if you can get an extra data point with people coming in the primary election, I think that's better for our democracy, especially at a time when really faith in government, especially federal government, is at an all-time low. This might be one way to kind of have people have more faith in their electoral process, and then in turn their democracy, is if we actually get more people in the door in the primary election.
One of the criticisms of an open primary is sabotage, where you have, some organized groups going in and voting for a candidate that they think that their candidate would beat in the general election. How big of a problem is sabotage in an open primary?
Well, look, I think that if there are folks trying to, go out and do that, that's probably going to end up to bite them in the butt, because if they end up being a recent voter in any primary, the opposite party is going to hound them like crazy going up to the election day in their GOTV process. And so I don't think a lot of folks are willing to really sign themselves up for that just by going out and voting in the primary. I've worked in a number of states, varying degrees of kind of red versus blue. I've campaigned in Kansas, I've campaigned in Iowa, I currently live in Virginia, and I'm very active in the democratic process here. And so kind of bringing that all into perspective, especially in a state like Kansas that is more of a conservative state, that's been more of a concern. But I think most times, currently, obviously, that has led to a Democrat governor in the state. But I think if you look at history over, the past 15 or 20 years, that really doesn't seem to be the case of kind of people trying to sabotage and nominate a weaker or a more beatable candidate. So,
Yeah, very good. All right, Victoria, thank you for the time this morning. GOP strategist Victoria Churchill on 610 WTVN.